Hey everyone, David MacDonald here in Vitality Fitness Calgary, and today we are going to be going over Dave's weekly rant. I'm not going to lie, this might get a little heated. This is a topic I'm very passionate about, and I've actually gotten into debates with people about this particular topic, and it's really frustrating. And I'm not normally one to criticize or judge any kind of discipline of fitness. I'm of the belief that if people are getting out there, they're getting more active, they're getting fitter, they're getting healthier. It's a heck of a lot better than sitting on the couch and doing nothing. I'm a firm believer in that. But I think there comes a point where you got to step back and you got to say, okay, well, we want people being active. But at what point is it actually being more of a detriment? At what point is it probably more beneficial for someone to actually sit on the couch than to do this particular activity that I'm gonna actually talk about today? Again, I'm gonna probably get a little bit heated here. This video might offend some of you, especially if you've participated in this type of activity before, you've done this discipline before. You might not like what I have to say. To be quite honest, I really don't care. I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and I'm actually going to explain why I have the arguments that I have. And if at any time you get offended, I mean, please, stop watching this video. I don't want to offend anyone, but I am going to get into why I do not like this particular discipline of fitness. Okay, I'm going to actually write this down so you guys can see what the discipline of fitness is. And the last straw for me was I read an article a few days ago about this lady who did this particular discipline competitively, and she's actually on the verge of kidney failure now because she's pushed her body so hard with this particular style of training. And a lot of people are going to argue that, oh well, she needs to know her limits, and she needs to make that judgment on when she's pushing too hard. And while I agree with that, I also make the argument that when you start seeing this consistently, you have to stop blaming the people and you need to start looking at how they're actually being trained. Okay, blaming the people is fucking bogus. Okay, it's bogus, and eventually you have to start taking responsibility, and you actually have to start looking at what you're applying in terms of training. Okay, so sorry for my swearing, but as you can see, this topic really pisses me off. So, my marker, of course, not working. So what I'm referring to, guys, hopefully you can see this, is the lovely activity of CrossFit, okay? Some of you actually might have guessed this at home when I went on my little mini rant there, but I am not a fan of CrossFit for many reasons. The first reason I'm not a fan of CrossFit is it actually violates a lot of scientific principles of exercise physiology. Okay, so what I mean by that is the principles of good, sound programming, exercise get completely violated with CrossFit. Now, some of you are going to be at home, you're going to be saying, well, my coach doesn't do that, or the class that I was in doesn't do that. You know what? There's always exceptions to the rule. Okay, there's always the people out there that are going to be a lot more responsible, that are going to properly apply these concepts in a training environment. Okay, I'm not saying that every single 100% of the CrossFit gyms out there do this. Okay, what I'm saying is that the majority of them do not follow principles of exercise physiology. Okay, and I'm going to give you guys multiple examples, and I'm going to give you guys really straightforward, simple examples. Okay, so the first thing we have is we have recovery. Okay, when you do a CrossFit session, there is very little time for recovery in between sets, in between sequences, in between circuits. There's next to no recovery. The whole premise of CrossFit is what's called a WOD. Okay, your WOD is your workout of the day. Okay, and the whole goal of the WOD is to complete a certain number of sets and reps in a certain number of minutes. Okay, so we're working against the clock essentially. We're seeing how many kipping pull-ups, handstand push-ups, 1 mile runs, or whatever the exercise of the day or the WOD of the day is going to be, how much of this we can complete in a certain time frame. Okay, I'm going to explain why that's actually very detrimental to exercise physiology and the principles of it. So first thing, recovery. Okay, we're not getting any recovery or very little recovery in these CrossFit sessions. Okay, recovery is going to help the client actually prevent them from getting injured. Okay, it's going to give the client some time to rest in between their sets. Okay, it's going to give the client time to recuperate and take a break. Okay, why would this be important? Well, I don't know. When we have some time to recover in between our sets or in between our sequences or our circuits, we're less likely to compensate. Okay, we are not training under a fatigue state. Okay, I know this might sound like, holy crap, this is common sense, but it's actually not common sense in CrossFit, okay? So when we recover, we are actually recovering from fatigue, so we're not training in a fatigue state. Okay, that's not to say that you can't train at all in any type of fatigue state. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we're getting some kind of recovery from the stimulus that we're putting on our body. Okay, so we're not compensating later on in the workout. Okay, we're not using other muscle groups that we're not supposed to be using later on in the workout when we're doing something else. Okay, so it's the lack of recovery, but it's also the cumulative effect of the lack of recovery. Okay, it's the fact that we're not getting any recovery or very little recovery throughout the workout, which is going to have a long-term impact down the road. Okay, it could be at the tail end of the workout, it could be in the next workout, it could be next month. But the bottom line is that the recovery within the workout, okay, is not there, and that can affect other workouts down the road, or it can also impact the workout later on that day. Okay, so that's basic principle right there with exercise physiology, is we're not getting enough recovery, okay, within the workout itself. So that's number one. That's one of the big downsides, one of the big problems I have with CrossFit. Okay, number two is progressions. Okay, when you start off exercising, you need to start slow. Okay, you need to start at your own fitness level. You need to start and work around whatever limitations you have, whether that's flexibility, whether that is body awareness, core strength, muscular strength, explosive power, whatever it might be. You got to start where you got to start. You got to start with wherever your limitations are, and you got to work around those, and you got to work with those. Okay, this is something that the majority of CrossFit gyms do not consider. Now again, I'm not saying every single CrossFit that's ever existed ignores this principle. Okay, but what I'm saying is the majority of them, the way in which these circuits and in which these exercises are applied, okay, violate this principle of progression and taking clients through adequate progressions. Okay, so for example, we get a client in to a gym and she's 45 years old, she's a mom of 3, she's never worked out a day in her life. Putting her on an overhead squat or putting her on a kipping pull-up or putting her on a handstand push-up is not a good idea. Okay, it's not a good idea because this lady does not have the foundation to be able to actually do these advanced movements. Okay, she needs to stretch, she needs to plank, she needs to do modified push-ups, she needs to work on getting out of her shoulders and actually working on building up some scapular stability strength. Okay, she needs to do a lot of row work, she needs to learn how to do a basic squat without body weight, she needs to learn how to do a basic deadlift with minimal weight to no weight. She needs to learn how to properly lunge, maybe with some assistance, maybe with a little bit of weight, maybe with body weight. It's really dependent on the client, but she needs to dial back and she needs to build up her level of fitness before she can start taking on these advanced moves. And that takes years. Okay, that takes years. If you're a 45-year-old woman and you've never worked out before, okay, if you want to be able to do an overhead squat, it's probably going to take you years to get to that point because your body needs time to adapt, to build the fundamentals, to build technique, to build the strength, and to build the fitness. And that takes time, and you can't speed that process up. Okay, you don't determine how quickly that happens. The way and the manner in which your body adapts is what determines that process, not you. Okay, so again, CrossFit, they have very, 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 very little knowledge in terms of applying proper progressions. Okay, again, I'm not saying they all do, but the majority of them do. Okay, and then you can see that evidence in based on how many injuries people from CrossFit get. I don't know how many people I know have gotten injured doing CrossFit workouts, or that have been pushed beyond what their limits are, or pushed beyond what their body is capable of. Okay, there's probably about 30 or 40 people I can think of right now that I've talked to that are clients here, or that were clients here, that have done these workouts and have sustained some kind of injury because they probably weren't progressed correctly, or they pushed too hard too soon. Now you can make the argument that that is on the client. The onus needs to be on the client. In some cases, absolutely. Maybe that client was told to hold back and to dial things back, and they didn't listen, and then they pushed anyways. Okay, yes, the onus can be on that client, but when we see this happen consistently, okay, this just isn't happening in 1 or 2 or 3 CrossFit gyms. This is a very common thing. This is what this discipline of training is known for. Okay, it's known that people get injured when they do CrossFit. Okay, because they're violating this principle of properly progressing people. Okay, so right there, that's another knock against CrossFit. That's another reason I do not like it. You got to start people off slow. I don't know where this got lost in the whole art and science of training, but people need to be progressed at their level. Okay, you can't have people doing overhead squats or kipping pull-ups or handstand push-ups or deadlifting with 2 plates aside if they don't have the fundamentals down, okay? Like, this is like training 101. Okay, and I understand that there's people out there who maybe haven't been educated, or maybe they took a certification and didn't teach them these things and they don't know any better. Fine, okay, I get that. But CrossFit as a whole does not seem to understand this, that you have to progress people slowly. Okay, it doesn't matter if you want to have them do their workout of the day and their handstand push-ups and their kettlebell swings and all this fun stuff. You got to progress them to those exercises. Okay, I don't care what your workout of the day says. If you're not progressing people to these exercises, okay, with adequate fundamentals and adequate foundation, they are going to get hurt. I can guarantee it 100%. They will get hurt. Okay. The other principle of exercise physiology that CrossFit violates is they don't take into account not only the rep and set schemes for certain movements, but in conjunction with the amount of rest that you need based on the rep and set schemes that you're doing with that particular movement. Okay, I know that's a mouthful, but I'm going to actually go over what I mean. So one of the big things that CrossFit has in their workouts is they have powerlifting. So they have things like clean and jerk, they have the snatch, they have, what's the other one? Hang cleans. So they have a lot of traditional powerlifting movements, okay? These powerlifting movements are very technical moves, okay? They are designed to be done under low reps. So we're talking 3 to 6 reps maximum, okay? They're also designed for adequate recovery. So if you are doing any kind of powerlifting movement, you're doing a snatch, you're doing a clean, you're doing a clean and jerk, adequate recovery has to happen, okay, after that movement, so you can go back to that movement and properly execute it again with the correct form. Okay, so doing a overhead snatch for 20 reps as part of your workout of the day does not jive with this principle, okay? These movements are technical. They are not designed to be done for high reps of 20 reps. That's just crazy. These are technical movements, okay? Any kind of deviation away from proper technique, especially if you're going into an overhead snatch, okay, you're gonna get injured or you're gonna compensate, which is gonna lead to an injury down the road. Okay, so adequate programming and adequate rep and set schemes and adequate recovery when you're doing any kind of powerlifting is necessary. It's only necessary for preventing injury, but it's necessary to prevent any kind of compensation, and is necessary for preserving correct form and correct technique. Okay, so when we see these things like doing 20 reps of an overhead snatch, or doing 20 reps of a power clean, or 20 reps of a clean and jerk, this is not smart, and this is in complete violation of exercise physiology.
Okay.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we didn't run out of time there on my rant. So, that being said, any kind of power movement, okay, you do not want to be doing any more than 6 reps. Okay, after 6 reps, fatigue starts to set in, compensation occurs, fundamentals, mechanics break down. So why the heck are we going to have someone do a 10, 15, 20 rep of an overhead snatch? That's just crazy. Okay, it's not smart. It's not recommended. And to add on top of that, it's not recommended when you're working with anyone who's a beginner or at an intermediate fitness level. That's crazy. Okay, you can't be doing this. Okay, again, I'm not saying that every single CrossFit does this, but the majority of CrossFit boxes and the majority of CrossFit gyms, okay, that I've experienced violate this principle. Okay, they have people doing 20 overhead snatches in conjunction with other exercises. Okay, in conjunction with, oh, you also have to do a kettlebell swing, and now you have to move on to your kipping pull-ups, and now you have to do your 400-meter row, okay, on a rowing machine. Okay, I have no problems with adding in powerlifting, without adding in an overhead snatch. If someone has the fundamentals, they have the foundation, they have the technique, and they're working within a specific number of reps and sets. Okay, now in terms of sets, these are the kind of movements we don't want to be doing for, you know, many sets. So anywhere between 3, maybe 6 sets, okay, for a power move, okay, or a power lift is appropriate. Okay, the other thing is we have recovery. So we have to have adequate recovery for these kind of lifts and these kind of movements. So when we're doing anything like an overhead snatch, we need to have adequate recovery after we've completed the set. Okay, adequate recovery for some people is going to be 1, 2, 3 minutes. We want to get recovery to the point when we go back in to do that movement, okay, our technique is just as good as what it was on the first set. Okay, for many people that's going to require minutes of recovery. Okay, not moving on to another exercise and cranking out 20 more kettlebell swings or 50 kipping pull-ups. Not that they would probably have that, but at the end of the day, we need to make sure, okay, that we're adding an adequate recovery with these movements. Okay, so that's another violation of exercise physiology that we see is not only are the set and rep schemes for particular movements completely off base, but the corresponding recovery that's needed with the big picture is off base as well. Okay, you cannot take a powerlifting move and then combine it with another move and then another move and another move in a circuit. That's just dangerous and it's irresponsible. Okay, very irresponsible. The other thing that I have a huge issue with CrossFit workouts is how exercises are structured and put together. Okay, so I gave you guys an example. One of the things I saw at a CrossFit gym was we had deadlifts which were being superset with lower back extensions. Okay, not smart, not a good idea. Okay, when we do a deadlift, whether it's a deadlift from the floor, we do a conventional deadlift, we do a Romanian deadlift, one of the muscles that is going to be involved is the posterior chain, or groups of muscles, sorry. We're going to have the hamstrings, we're going to have the glutes, and we're also going to have the lower back involved. Okay, so it's a very taxing movement, it's a very demanding movement. So to superset someone on or with a lower back extension when they're already in a fatigue state from a deadlift, not a good idea, because we are now reworking those muscles that we just taxed. Okay, you do any kind of lower back extension, you are going to isolate the lower back muscles. You're also going to work the glutes and the hamstrings, the secondary muscle. Okay, they work as a stabilizer muscle in that movement. Okay, so is it a good idea to max out a deadlift go to fatigue, and then superset that with another exercise that works the exact same muscle group. Okay? For most people, that is not a good idea. Okay? Not something I would recommend. Okay? We've already taxed that muscle group or that group of muscles. We don't want to go and tax it again. We want to give some kind of recovery, okay, to those muscle groups that have been worked. Okay, so that doesn't mean that we can't do something directly after we've done this exercise. That might mean that we work another muscle group that doesn't compete with that, or another group of muscles. Okay, these are known as non-competing supersets. Okay, it's a great way to structure your workouts. It's one of the things we do at boot camp. We do non-competing supersets to give the muscle group that was just worked some recovery time. Okay, but working a deadlift followed by a lower back extension, not a good idea. Okay, not smart. Okay, we're not giving adequate recovery time for that muscle. Now the argument that we might give, or that might be given as well, if you do any kind of bodybuilder style training, they do tend to work multiple muscle groups at once. They might do a shoulder press, followed by a shoulder raise, followed by a rear delt fly. Okay, correct, that does happen, but the things to keep in mind are these people who are doing these kind of supersets are very advanced. They're very advanced lifters, okay, and they are adding in some kind of recovery after the superset. So they might do 3 exercises in a row, okay, and they might take recovery after they've done those 3 exercises. They're not doing 3 exercises and then going again, and then going again, and then going in without any kind of recovery in between. Okay, the other thing to keep in mind is that whenever we see these kind of supersets, in traditional bodybuilding training, usually what happens is that they are working the same muscle group, they're working at a different angle. So they're targeting a specific area of that muscle and not just directly on one point of the muscle. Okay, so for example, a shoulder press, okay, and a rear delt fly are going to work the shoulders, but different aspects or different parts of the shoulders. That's another thing to keep in mind. Okay, going back and forth between lower back extensions and deadlifts without any kind of recovery, not a good idea. Okay, again, we are violating some really basic principles here of not only exercise physiology, but also program design. Okay, we are violating recovery principles. We're violating supersetting principles. Okay, we are violating circuit principles, how to structure circuits for not only maximum benefit, but maximum injury prevention. Okay, so these are a lot of the big problems, guys, that I have with CrossFit is they don't take these things into account. Okay, and you can see that based on the rate at which people get injured. Okay, the discipline is loaded with injuries. We can't deny that. There is no other discipline of fitness that I have ever come across that produces as many injuries as CrossFit. The only thing that I can think of that would do that would be running. And that's a whole other rant for a whole other day. I'm talking about long distance running. Okay, the last thing I'm gonna go over with my CrossFit rant is the fact that the whole culture of CrossFit has made it a badge of honor to push yourself to the point of breaking, to the point of getting sick, to the point of puking, to the point of dropping to the floor, to the point of I can't walk the next day. If you guys have seen any kind of videos on YouTube making fun of CrossFit or any spoofs or any parodies, this is one of the big things that is highlighted and targeted is this bizarre culture that's been created with CrossFit of pushing beyond your limits. And I'm sorry guys, but pushing yourself to the point of puking, it's not smart and it's not cool. Okay, pushing yourself to the point where you feel like you're gonna drop or to the point where you can't even function or walk the next day, not smart, not cool, and it's not gonna get you the results that you actually want. Okay, what we recommend you do is you push yourself, you get uncomfortable, you push yourself out of your comfort zone, but you do it in an intelligent manner. Okay, and the best people to look at when it comes to not only pushing themselves, but pushing themselves and creating positive adaptations with minimal amount of injury is look at how athletes train. Okay, athletes push themselves, they get out of their comfort zone, but they do it intelligently. Okay, they do it intelligently by adding in recovery. Not only recovery inside the workout, but recovery outside of the workout. Okay, they know when to back off. Okay, they know when they need to push themselves to that next level. They know when to add that weight. They know when to take a particular movement and progress it to that next level. Okay, and most importantly, they know when they need to take time off. Okay, when you train athletes and you watch athletes train, it's not a badge of honor for athletes to push themselves to the point of puking. For some groups of athletes, that might be the case, but if you look at professional athletes, you're never going to see a professional athlete train to that point, because they know that they need to push themselves intelligently, but they also have to know when to back off and when to rest and when to recover and when to say, you know what, enough is enough for today. Okay, I've completed the amount of sets and reps that I need to do to produce the training effect and to produce the results that I want. I don't need to do, 5 more or 6 more sets. I don't need to go into overkill mode. And unfortunately, that's what CrossFit does. It puts too many trainees into overkill mode, okay, with the badge of honor that you need to push yourself to the point of puking, to the point of exhaustion, to the point of collapse, to the point where you can't walk tomorrow, to the point of, as crazy as this sounds, kidney failure, which does happen in CrossFit. So that's another big problem I have with CrossFit, guys, is that clients and trainees are getting pushed, but they're getting pushed too far, and they're not being pushed intelligently. Okay, they're not being told when it's time to back off, or when it's time to scale back, or when it's time to take a day off from training. Okay, so that's my rant of the week. It might have offended some of you. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I don't care, because I've been able to back up what I'm saying with just some basic real-world principles of program design and exercise physiology, which are violated in most cases in most CrossFit gyms. I'm MacDonald from Vitality Fitness Calgary. That's my rant of the week. Thanks so much for watching.